What if the founder of a luxury spa was thrown out like a beggar by his own staff, who didn't know who he really was? Hello, wonderful listeners. Your wisdom, empathy, and sharp intuition are exactly what this story honors. Today's tale dives deep into a hidden transformation, where quiet dignity clashes with corporate arrogance, and one man's return reshapes everything. If you believe kindness should never be optional, you're in for something unforgettable. So settle in, take a deep breath, and join us for a story where respect is tested, souls are revealed, and justice arrives dressed in humility. Walter Shaw sat alone in his modest mountain cabin, a fire crackling in the hearth, as a promotional video for Solera Springs Wellness Retreat played on his muted television. He watched the glowing images of pristine hot stone massages, luxury facials, and guests clinking herbal cocktails in eucalyptus-scented lounges, all paired with the tagline he himself had coined decades earlier, "Healing for the soul, no matter who you are." But the warmth those words once held had long since faded. Walter, now 68 and semi-retired, had handed off day-to-day operations of the wellness resort to a younger executive team 5 years ago. He had trusted them to preserve the vision he and his late wife Clara built from scratch, a sanctuary where anyone, regardless of status or wealth, could find peace and be treated with dignity. That trust was now in question. In his lap sat a handwritten letter from a former guest, an elderly widow named Elsie, who described how she was subtly mocked by staff for ordering only tea, ignored for services, and eventually shamed over a gratuity she didn't know was mandatory. Her words weren't bitter, they were wounded, and they echoed what Walter had heard in other recent letters and whispered complaints, that Solera had become a place where appearance mattered more than presence, and profits had quietly edged out purpose. A spreadsheet report forwarded by a loyal former employee confirmed his fears. Skyrocketing upsell targets, a new wellness fee added to every treatment, and policies that routed high-value guests to preferred staff. What stung the most was the realization that what once was his refuge for the weary had become, in his absence, a glossy fortress for the elite. Walter rose slowly from his chair, slipping the letter into his coat pocket. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something far deeper: disappointment, conviction, and a quiet fire. If his name still meant anything on the deed, then he owed it to every guest who had once walked through those doors, believing they mattered. "I didn't build this place to sell spa packages," he murmured to no one. "I built it to heal people." He picked up his phone and called the one person he still trusted at headquarters. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I'm going back in, but not as myself." The staff entrance at Solera Springs was a world apart from the cascading waterfalls and aromatic welcome breezes of the front lobby. Walter Shaw stepped through the narrow back corridor, wearing a faded maintenance uniform, tool belt slung around his waist, and a clipboard tucked under one arm. The name patch on his chest read Walt, and no one gave him a second glance. The quiet anonymity was almost comforting. For the founder of a once revered sanctuary, being unseen now gave him the clarity he needed. He passed unnoticed by massage therapists laughing in a break room and front desk associates complaining about cheap walk-ins who only booked the basic packages. No one recognized the man whose portrait still hung in the executive hallway upstairs, though covered now by a newer motivational slogan: upsell, uplift, excel. As Walter walked through the spa corridors, pretending to inspect vents and air purifiers, he took in the changed energy of the place. Where once there had been a tranquil sense of welcome, there was now an almost transactional air. Service with a smile, but only if the guest looked the part. In the lounge, he overheard a staffer whisper that one client's worn yoga pants meant she was definitely going to stiff on the wellness fee. Walter made a note on his clipboard, not about the vents, but about the culture. He paused briefly in a quiet hallway outside the employee kitchen, rubbing his hands for warmth, when a soft voice called out, "Hey there, did you get offered coffee? They're slow about that for new hires." A young woman in a soft beige uniform stood, holding a tray of fresh eucalyptus towels. Her name tag read Lena, and her eyes were warm, unguarded. Walter smiled and shook his head. "No worries. I'm just the new guy fixing filters," she grinned. "Well, new guys deserve a welcome too. Let me grab you something." It was the first kindness he'd received all morning. As he watched Lena disappear down the hallway, Walter realized not all hope was lost. In a place where silence had replaced service, and judgment had replaced care, someone still treated the unseen with humanity. He continued his rounds, observing quietly. He took in the customer flow, the glances exchanged between staff, and the way the front desk staff subtly sized up each guest's worth. Solera still wore the mask of serenity, but beneath it, something was broken, and Walter Shaw intended to fix it, one hidden step at a time. That afternoon, Walter sat on a bench near the guest relaxation atrium, pretending to examine an air filter unit mounted high on the wall. From his vantage point, he could see the morning staff huddled beginning near the smoothie bar. Spa director Tessa Langford, perfectly coiffed and dressed in a flowing silk blazer, stood at the center of a semicircle of spa associates and therapists. With a serene tone honed for luxury clientele, she announced the latest policy shift. "Effective today, all services will include a 22% mandatory wellness fee," she said smoothly. "It's not optional and should be described as part of our holistic care experience. No exceptions." Several staff nodded blankly. One or two exchanged quick, uncertain glances. Walter recognized the language immediately, packaged empathy used to veil exploitation. A fee for staff wellness, branded as a guest privilege, but in truth, a surcharge designed to boost profits and encourage tiered service. When an older guest later checked in for a basic soak and declined any add-ons, Walter saw a front desk associate press her to consider an essential oils upgrade, subtly implying it was part of the wellness standard. The woman declined again. The associate, though smiling, marked something down with a sigh and looked toward Tessa. Later that day, Walter booked himself for a simple foot soak under a guest alias, choosing the lowest price offering $19.00 for 20 minutes. He wore a clean but faded cardigan and arrived carrying a paperback novel and an old wallet. From the moment he approached the service counter, he felt the temperature shift. Bryce Maddox, the senior massage therapist on duty, looked him up and down with mild irritation. "Walk in for just the soak?" he asked, almost incredulous. "Yes, just that," Walter replied kindly. Bryce's eyes narrowed as he handed him a form and added pointedly, "You do know there's a wellness fee. It's included in all services now." Walter nodded, not reacting. Bryce didn't bother offering water or slippers as he did for others. Instead, he led Walter to a side bench near the farthest tub, away from the lounge's scenic windows. When Walter settled in and gently asked, "Would it be possible to have the water a little warmer?" Bryce didn't respond. The water remained lukewarm. By the end of his brief service, the bill totaled $28.00 with tax and fee. Walter opened his wallet and counted $20 bills, but intentionally hesitated. When Bryce noticed, he smirked and walked away, muttering, "Shoulda known." For Walter, that moment confirmed everything he feared. Dignity was no longer a default at Solera Springs. It had become a luxury reserved only for those who paid extra. Walter stood outside the grand ivy-covered archway of Solera Springs, the same one he had personally designed with Clara 30 years earlier. The twilight breeze rolled softly across the stone path beneath his feet as spa guests strolled past him, none paying much attention to the man in the worn sweater holding a paper receipt. Clutched in his hand was the bill for his $19.00 foot soak, now bloated with fees and devoid of warmth. But it wasn't the amount that stung. It was the look of casual disdain on Bryce's face, the hollow indifference in his service, and the system that empowered such behavior. The man who once built a haven for healing had been reduced to a silent witness of its decline. He walked slowly to a nearby bench and sat beneath a maple tree, shedding its leaves. He opened his wallet, staring briefly at the few crumpled bills still inside. Then he pulled out the small notepad he had kept since the day Clara passed, where every observation from that day was carefully recorded. He flipped through the pages, then retrieved his phone and scrolled to one name, Eleanor Vale. She picked up on the first ring. "Walt?" Her voice was laced with concern. "It's worse than I thought," he said quietly, his tone resolute. "You were right to be worried." "What happened?" "I was treated like a nuisance. Others were ignored. One woman was shamed at the checkout. The staff has learned to smile without seeing people. They've turned this place into a sanctuary for egos, not for souls." I paused. "I need you to do something for me," he continued. "Call Gerald, loop in Tomas, and alert the board. Tell them we're holding a mandatory all-staff meeting tonight, 7 p.m. in the main solarium." "You're going public?" Eleanor asked softly. "Not yet, but I am done watching. It's time they remember whose name is still on the foundation stone." He hung up, rose slowly, and took one last look at the sprawling spa he once considered his life's masterpiece. Tonight wouldn't be about revenge, it would be about accountability. And by tomorrow, Solera Springs would either rediscover its soul or lose its founder for good. By early evening, the staff of Solera Springs shuffled into the glass-walled solarium, their soft-soled shoes barely making a sound on the polished marble floor. The mood was noticeably tense. No gentle background music, no herbal tea bar, just a cold hush and rows of chairs arranged in a crescent. At the front stood a woman in her early 60s, hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing a slate-gray pantsuit and holding a slim digital tablet. She introduced herself in clipped tones as Eleanor Vale, a corporate compliance officer from the spa's advisory board. Her presence wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. Solera's leadership rarely interfered so directly. Tessa Langford arrived 5 minutes late, gliding in with a rehearsed smile that faltered the moment she saw Eleanor. "Apologies," she said, attempting to reclaim control. "Had I known we'd be audited tonight, I would have—" "That's the point of a compliance audit, Ms. Langford," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "They're designed to be clarifying." Staff exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered to one another, others sat silently, eyes darting toward the hallway. In the back, Bryce Maddox leaned against a decorative pillar, arms crossed smugly. He nudged a fellow therapist beside him. "This is about that janitor thing," he whispered, loud enough to be overheard by a few. "Guy came in looking for freebies. Total drain on the vibe." Eleanor's ears perked at that. She looked up from her tablet. "Janitor incident?" she repeated with careful curiosity. Bryce straightened, still cocky. "Yeah, some guy came in for a cheap soak and tried to duck the wellness fee. I escorted him out. Places like this need standards. Can't let just anyone wander in and expect luxury." Eleanor clicked her pen and made a note. "Interesting." Before Tessa could interject, the doors at the back of the solarium opened again. Everyone turned. A man stepped forward in a dark charcoal suit, posture tall, presence unmistakable. Though the staff didn't immediately recognize him out of his humble disguise, the silence in the room turned heavy when they saw Walter Shaw. No longer invisible, no longer unknown. His silver hair was neatly combed, his eyes calm yet piercing. For a beat, no one moved. Tessa's face was drained of color. Bryce blinked hard, confusion tightening into dawning dread. Walter walked toward the front of the room and stood beside Eleanor. "I believe we've all had a long day," he said softly, voice low and even. "But before it ends, there are a few things we need to make clear. The spell of indifference at Solera Springs had just been broken, and no one in that room would leave unchanged." For a long moment, the only sound in the solarium was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Walter Shaw let the silence settle before he spoke, his hands resting calmly on the back of a chair. When he did, his voice carried the quiet weight of someone who had built something from nothing and just watched it decay. "I founded Solera Springs 30 years ago with my late wife Clara," he began, scanning the faces of the staff. "We started with 4 massage tables, 2 tubs, and a belief that healing shouldn't be reserved for the wealthy, that every guest, no matter what they wore or how much they tipped, should feel seen, safe, and respected." His gaze landed squarely on Bryce, who now stood motionless, his earlier swagger gone. Today, I came back under a different name, Walter continued. I wore an old cardigan. I paid in cash. I asked for nothing but the basic service, and I was treated as if I had dirt on my shoes and bad intentions in my heart. He turned to Eleanor, who nodded and tapped her tablet. A hidden speaker crackled to life, playing crisp audio from earlier in the day. Bryce mocking Walter's appearance, dismissing his warmth, and sneering, "Should have known." The audio ended with the unmistakable scrape of a door opening, as Bryce had shoved him outside. Gasps broke across the room. Tessa Langford stepped forward, trying to mask her panic with professionalism. "Mr. Shaw, I assure you, had I known—" Walter held up a hand. "That's precisely the problem. You shouldn't have had to know who I was. No guest should need a title to deserve dignity." He faced the room again, now fully composed but resolute. "This spa was built on values, not velvet robes. But what I saw today, forced fees, preferential treatment, humiliation over tips, this isn't a sanctuary. It's a business wearing a spiritual mask." Bryce opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the room was too heavy now. Walter turned to him. "Mr. Maddox, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Security had been standing discreetly at the rear. Now they stepped forward. Bryce didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. "As for Miss Langford," Walter added without looking at her, "your status is under board review. You're suspended pending further investigation." He turned to the rest of the staff. "This isn't about punishment. It's about clarity. And about deciding who we want to be, starting now." The next morning, the scent of lemongrass still drifted softly through the halls of Solera Springs. But something had undeniably shifted. The staff arrived early, unsure of what to expect, only to find Walter Shaw already in the main atrium, dressed simply, sleeves rolled up, reviewing a stack of handwritten notes. There were no grand speeches this time, just a firm, heartfelt call for renewal. "We're not scrapping everything," Walter began. "We're reclaiming what mattered most." First, he announced the immediate abolishment of the mandatory 22% wellness fee, replacing it with a fully transparent, optional gratuity system. "No more disguised penalties," he said. "Respect is not something you should pay extra for." Next, he introduced a performance-based bonus structure, one that rewarded genuine hospitality, emotional intelligence, and guest satisfaction, not just who could push the most upgrades or win over the wealthiest clients. Staff would now be evaluated not by dollar signs, but by written feedback and real connection. To lead the cultural reset, Walter welcomed back Jonas Rivers, the spa's original head therapist, who had left 5 years earlier when the corporate focus shifted to profit margins. Jonas was known not only for his healing touch, but for mentoring junior staff with compassion and calm authority. His return was met with spontaneous applause from some of the older employees and respectful curiosity from the newer ones. Then came the most unexpected announcement of all. Lena Quinn, the young trainee who had shown Walter simple kindness when no one else did, was being promoted to guest experience supervisor during the transition. "In a place where people looked through me," Walter said, "she looked at me. That's leadership." Lena's eyes widened in disbelief, but Walter simply nodded to her with a quiet smile. "You'll help redesign how we welcome every guest, from the moment they enter to the moment they leave." Lastly, Walter informed the staff that Solera Springs would now implement monthly anonymous guest audits, including solo walk-ins, seniors, and those booking basic services. "You'll never know who's evaluating," he said, "and that's the point. Everyone matters, every time." By the end of the meeting, the room that once echoed with hierarchy now hummed with a strange new energy. Hope. The chandeliers still sparkled, the walls still whispered tranquility, but beneath it all something had come alive again. The soul of Solera was stirring. 3 weeks later, under a dusky pink sky, Walter Shaw walked up the winding stone path to Solera Springs, not as the founder, not as a janitor, but simply as a guest. He wore a comfortable gray sweater, slacks, and walking shoes, his posture relaxed, his presence unassuming, The evening breeze carried hints of eucalyptus and citrus, and the soft burble of the courtyard fountain welcomed him home. Though he carried no reservation and hadn't called ahead, he was greeted immediately at the front desk by a young man named Miguel, who offered him a warm smile without a trace of pretense. "Welcome to Solera Springs," Miguel said, folding his hands respectfully. "Have you visited with us before?" Walter smiled. "A long time ago." "It's good to be back." Miguel didn't press for details. Instead, he asked kindly, "Would you prefer a view of the gardens or something more private?" Walter requested the garden, and Miguel personally led him there, offering fresh spa water and a rolled towel as they walked. No one rushed him. No one sized him up. The spa looked the same, but the energy was different, lighter, more sincere. He passed couples in robes chatting comfortably, a mother and daughter laughing quietly in the herbal steam lounge, and even a solo senior guest being treated with attentive care by a therapist who never once checked the clock. Gone were the silent judgments, the transactional glances. In their place, eye contact, genuine warmth, and simple decency. When Walter was seated in the soaking garden with a view of the reflecting pool, Lena approached, now in a tailored uniform with a gold pin on her collar denoting her new leadership role. Her eyes widened in recognition. "I didn't know you were visiting today, Mr. Shaw," she said softly. "No special treatment," he replied with a wink. "I just wanted to see what we've become." She nodded, then glanced around the garden. "Would you say we've changed?" Walter leaned back, the golden light casting gentle shadows across his weathered face. "The chairs are the same, the stones, the scent in the air, but yes," he said, watching a therapist kneel beside an elderly man to adjust his leg towel with care. "It feels like the place we meant to build. It remembers." Lena smiled. "We've still got work to do." He nodded. "That's how you know it's alive." And with that, Walter closed his eyes, leaned into the warmth of the water, and for the first time in a long while, relaxed. As twilight settled over the mountains, casting long shadows across the grounds of Solera Springs, Walter Shaw stood once more at the front entrance. This time, he didn't arrive as a spy in disguise, or even as a quiet guest. He simply stood still, soaking in the atmosphere like a father watching his child come home after a long journey. The new sign above the entryway, carved into polished cedar, read, "Solera Springs, healing for all." No gilded logos, no slogans about prestige. Just purpose. From where he stood, he could see the spa glowing warmly through its glass walls. A middle-aged couple was being checked in at the front desk. Their clothes were casual, their luggage modest, and yet the staff welcomed them with the same graciousness usually reserved for VIPs. Nearby, a young boy clutched a book, while his grandmother was guided gently by an attendant through the lavender-scented hall toward a soak room. Not rushed, not overlooked, just seen. Walter turned at the sound of footsteps. It was Lena, clipboard in hand, a gentle confidence in her stride that hadn't been there weeks before. She stopped beside him, followed his gaze inside. "Hard to believe this is the same place," she said, softly. He nodded. "In a way, it's not. It's better." They stood in silence for a moment, watching a staff member laugh with an elderly guest over a shared joke, and a therapist pause to tie a robe sash for someone whose hands trembled slightly. "We're not perfect," Lena added. "We're not supposed to be," Walter replied. "Perfection doesn't heal people. Compassion does." She smiled. "We'll keep building it." He turned toward her, eyes kind but clear. "And protect it. Never again let policies matter more than people." She gave a firm nod. "Never." As Walter stepped back toward the path home, he cast one final look over his shoulder. The building shimmered under the lights, not from its crystal chandeliers or expensive finishes, but from the people inside, treating strangers like they mattered. Solera Springs had reclaimed more than its founders' approval. It had reclaimed its soul. The story of Solera Springs teaches a timeless and powerful lesson. True service is measured not by luxury, but by humanity. When dignity is tied to appearance, and kindness is reserved only for those who spend the most, institutions lose their soul, even ones built on healing. Walter Shaw's quiet return in disguise revealed not just the rot of elitism, but the cost of forgetting core values. His journey reminds us that leadership isn't just about profits or prestige. It's about protecting the vulnerable, empowering the humble, and ensuring everyone is treated with decency, regardless of their wallet. By reclaiming his vision and restoring compassion to his staff, Walter not only redeemed the spa, but reminded everyone watching, especially older audiences who've seen similar shifts in society, that principles must be lived, not just written on walls. In the end, what makes a place sacred isn't how it looks, but how it makes people feel. And when we prioritize respect over revenue, we build something that truly lasts.